Uh, good evening. Welcome to your latest installment of Astra Presents. Tonight we welcome James Harris, national champion, oration coach, and national runner-up as well. First and second in oration in the last 5 years, or am I getting old? Has it been more than 5 years?
15 and 16.
6 years now. Anyway, regardless, I know that James has been the person that I've always looked to, and actually, I'm probably getting rusty now because the events evolved. But when I first started coaching, James had broken down oration into such a simple formula that even a dummy could do it, a dummy like me. So I'm gonna be quiet and let James have the floor. But thank you all for joining us tonight.
All right. Well, thanks for the introduction, Mike. We'll go ahead and get started here. All right, let me share my screen real quick here. And all right. There we go. So can everybody see that okay? If you can't see that, then let me know in the chat because I can't see on my screen either. So, all right. So, well, thanks for tuning in, everybody, or joining us tonight. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about oratory. So as Mike mentioned here, as Mike mentioned, let's see, am I in the right spot? Hold on one sec. Sorry about this. All right. Are we supposed to join the breakout room?
All right, I messed something up, didn't I? Is James gone? What happened, Johnny?
I got a breakout room invite. So
All right.
I guess that's how we're doing it. I clicked it and then we were
Hey,
all
Mike.
confused.
Sorry, I'm back. Was I supposed to join the breakout room or not?
No, I didn't. I don't know how.
I think he just sent a breakout invite to everybody accidentally. So
yeah, I created one and just to send it to Steve. I didn't mean. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm gonna do one thing before I go back, and that is.
Sorry, James.
No worries.
It's state week. We're at the top of our game.
I know. Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah.
Another thing. Just no worry.
Okay, Russ, will you move me into that breakout room with Steve?
Move you?
Yeah, that way you can be the host and you can
Are you in room 1?
yeah, whatever it says where Steve is. I
Okay.
don't know why I can't.
Got
move.
it. Got it. Got it. James, you should be good to go now, I think.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so let's go ahead.
We're
and
professionals.
Yeah, sometimes. All right.
Right.
So let's share screen here. And then there we go. All right, let me turn. Oops. Turn it again here. Make sure all the buttons are there. We go. All right. And then. Well, there we go. All right. So let's talk a little bit about oratory here. Just to kind of give a little bit of background, kind of where I come from when I look at and coach oratory. I have never performed an original oratory in my entire life. And it's one of those things when I got into coaching, you know, you kind of get into coaching and you have the events that you feel comfortable with, and then the events that you really just don't have a clue kind of on what to do. And oratory for me was one of those events. Like my exposure to oratory was really limited to my senior year. A girl that I kind of had a crush on like did oratory, so of course I went and watched her in final rounds when I could. And so when I first got to the school that I'm at, I had students who said, well, we do oratory and we would like to continue to do oratory. And so I kind of, it's like, okay, well, sure. And we kind of plugged along for a couple of years. But then after a couple of years, I really fell in love with the event itself. And I thought to myself, I've got to get to a place where we can make intelligent decisions and good decisions on speech topics and structure, and just like take that next step. And so the first thing I did is I just kind of started watching oratory rounds and taking notes on what I saw and what everybody else was doing. And then I took it a step further specifically and started watching more from NSDA nationals. And my approach to this is based on what I've seen over the years. And then of course, we've been pretty lucky with this. In 2014, with Keenan Brinkley, we were 10th in the nation. In 2015, he was national champion. In 2016, I had Hannah Watson, who was second in the nation. After that, I've also had quarterfinalists and octafinalists in oratory. Overall, I think we have 5 state championships. And so I feel like this model for us has worked out pretty well, and we're going to continue to push, and hopefully we continue to succeed. But I really want to share, you know, I enjoy sharing this with everyone because I think that oratory can be a pretty powerful event, and it's important for the students, particularly in this day and age when students are interested in having their voice heard. I think that this event really does, I wouldn't say necessarily the best job, but it really is easy, at least for the students, to identify how their voice can be heard. And this is something that I think attracts a lot of them. And with that, we can go ahead and start to look at some of the basic elements here in kind of what we're going to talk about. And so some of the basic objectives is just kind of how to get some ideas with topics. And from there, just structure, talk about the speech times, kind of run the math on that, show you some examples of some things, and just basically what it takes to be successful. You can see this is a picture of me and Hannah Watson from the 2016 Nationals in Salt Lake City there. And with these skills, I mean, obviously it takes a special student to be successful. They've got to work hard, they've got to want it, they've got to have certainly some talent. But I think that kind of with this, which is I share these basic elements with the students, is that the students who are willing to put in the time, most of them can find success on their own. You know, that might not be, you know, a national level success, but still, there's no reason why most students can't succeed with this. The first thing that I always start with when I talk about oratory, and this is a revelation that kind of came to me at the Las Vegas Nationals in 2008. I judged a round of oratory that was a prelim round. And this round was just jaw-dropping. Like, I didn't even know how to rank everybody in this room because it was so good. And the weird thing about this round was that you see these students get up and perform, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, man, every single one of these is so good. And then some of the people looked a little bit familiar. And the strange thing about this prelim round was that two of the people in this prelim round of ORAD at Nationals had been in duo finals the previous year. And this is one of them here, Jamaica Young. She gave a fascinating speech. She ended up being second in oratory in 2008. And in that speech, she talked about the idea of how everybody's being taught to be a leader, but we should also learn how to be a good follower. So it's a pretty good speech. You can go back and watch. But what really struck me, though, was how we in Kansas, I think, often approach oratory in the wrong direction. We kind of lump it together with a lot of the traditional speaking events, you know, your extemps, your informatives, and don't really consider kind of that performance element to be as significant. But after seeing these kids move from interp events to oratory, it really struck me as they're a lot more related than people kind of give it credit for. And that's an element that I've tried to bring to most of my oratories and when I talk to students. And the thing about that is it comes back to their personal story. Just like telling or giving a good interp is all about the story, a good oratory is about the story as well. And that personal connection is something that is certainly pretty critical. And oratory really is just kind of that perfect blend of kind of the interpreter spirit, a good story, and then those basic elements of persuasion, that the ethos, pathos, logos type persuasion, and balancing out all of those different elements. And to kind of hammer this home, I hope the audio works on this, but this is the 2017 national champion. And I've got a clip of the beginning of his oration, and just kind of look at the energy. If you've never seen this before, it's a very impressive. Looks like it's going to freeze on us there. But you get the idea here of that energy that he was bringing with his speech there. And if you watch that full speech, if you haven't seen that, that's a great speech. JJ Kapoor there really just brought that energy, and you can see the facial expressions. He's so expressive. And he was a very strong speaker the previous year. He made it to semifinals in 2016 because Hannah was talking about him at that nationals. And it's really that energy that you've got to bring. Now, I will kind of put this slight caveat out there. One mistake that I think a lot of people make is, and you know, don't get me wrong, I think the NSDA final round recordings are absolutely critical in terms of a teaching tool, but you've got to front load this with students. And one of the elements you've got to tell them is, look, this is the final stage. The final stage, you know, you absolutely bring it. I mean, it's kind of cliche, you know, you just leaving it all out on the court, but that's really kind of true. And it's easier to do that at nationals with that event. from a timing perspective, you basically find out on Wednesday if you're getting to finals, and then finals isn't till Friday for those events. And even the ones that are on Thursday, the ATERP events that are on Thursday evening, you've got like a whole day to practice. And I will also tell you that people make specific adjustments for the stage. In 2015 with Keenan, we made a specific adjustment for the stage. If you watch that speech, in his when he gets to his solution, he starts to walk off stage. It's kind of a funny moment that we added where he gets to his solution and his speech is about shaming, and he gets to it and he says, here's the solution, don't shame, and then just starts to walk off the stage. And you can even see the head of the round start to come up on stage, and we take 2 steps and pause and then come back. That was the only round we did that in. So you do see people make those adjustments for stage, and we'll talk about that even a little bit more as we go on. If we're going to write a speech, it's always important to start at the beginning, and that's with topic selection. And often I talk to coaches and they're kind of like, every once in a while somebody has a good idea, but I get stuck, with these kids. They just don't really know what to do. And with this, a couple ideas that I always start with when kids I like oratory, but I don't know what to do. I always ask them, okay, sit down and tell me, think about it. What's the angriest you've ever been? What's one time that you in your life can identify that you were wronged and or cheated? Or have you personally experienced injustice? Just any type of story of injustice. And for my students, we have a kind of a white suburban district for the most part, and the injustice component for a lot of them because of their privilege is very limited. And that's fine. You can take some of those elements and build that in particularly well for an intro. You can make a good intro out of those types of things. But with these prompts, you're just trying to get the students kind of the wheels turning here. And with these things, the students will often start to kind of spark some ideas. And so dig a little bit deeper, do what we do as good teachers. Ask more questions, ask follow-up questions, make them think about it a little bit more. And often that's going to be kind of enough to get the ball rolling there. You can kind of guide your students too. I always have a running list of topic possibilities in a folder that I keep. I mean, we all get on social media, let's admit it. And as you're perusing social media, you see articles and things that pop up that are kind of, make you, like, oh, that's kind of weird. That's kind of interesting. Just get in the habit of collecting those articles. Just hit save, save as a PDF or whatever. Get those collected so that you kind of have that file, a little bit of file of research there. And you can use, Evernote. That's always a good option too. That's easy, as you can install it on Chrome and you just kind of hit the button to clip it and you can save that. And one of the things about this though, that's important to do, again, is your oratories are really going to hinge off of your students' personal connection to the topic. And that connection to the topic is so critical. And with this, if you're going to kind of help them come up with a topic, if I'm going to show you a list of topics and things, if I'm going to, give you an article to read to make you think about a topic, I'm going to tell the students specifically, here's an article about this, but, you can't use this article in your speech. You've got to go out and use this article as a springboard to do your own research. Remember, it's got to be the student's words, but just simple, fact of the matter is they've got to connect. If they don't connect with the topic, then they're always going to be capped out in how successful they can be. So keep that in mind. Topic selection, it's tricky, and it's one thing that kind of comes up from this, of course, students are always going to start coming up with super common topics, just topics that are things that you've probably heard hundreds of times. And we always kind of have this knee-jerk reaction to just be like, well, let's pick something else because that's a little bit overdone. My approach towards topics that are kind of seemingly overdone is, what twist can we take it? What twist can we take this topic and really kind of come at a different angle to make it a interesting topic? There is value in having a topic that is seemingly overdone, because if you can bring some kind of fresh air to that topic, oftentimes it makes judges kind of perk up, like, wow, I have heard something about it, but that's an interesting thought about it. In a way, it's almost like your opponent's kind of primed the pump, and then you come in with this alternative thing, and it's just shocking. And so this becomes kind of powerful in a way that it can really help familiarize, the audience is already basically familiar with the concepts, and so you're not trying to reinvent the wheel here with everything. I also think it's pretty funny when you see people say, like, oh, I think that topic's overdone, but realize so many national topics are functionally similar. And I'll give you an example here. This is 2015 and 2016. We're going to watch these intros. I'll pull these up here. Let's see if I can do this real quick here. So we'll start with 2015's Akeda Maloli. She went on to win the national championship. She was the one that beat Hannah in the next year, but this was 2015. She was third place this year, but we'll just listen to her intro and kind of talk.
It is known as the ultimate battle. Once a year, the creatures emerge from their caves and fight to establish superiority. Anything can be compromised: flesh, hair, limbs, sanity, because this is the fight for survival. But not for wild animals. It's for the upperclassmen girls that go to my high school, who are basically wild animals. My high school has a lot of really weird traditions, one of them being Powder Puff, where the senior and junior girls fight each other in what is officially considered female football. Here are the rules. Yeah, there are no rules. It's basically a giant cat fight, and there may or may not be a football on the field. One year, a knife was pulled. Another year, girls filled water guns with deer urine to squirt at the other team. Which begs the question, where did they get deer urine? But these otherwise sane girls quite literally tackle and drop kick each other because, well, they're supposed to hate each other. It's us against them. And this outlook on life isn't just something the girls at my high school share. Today, it seems that we have grown increasingly inclined to separate and disconnect ourselves from people who we see as the other, as them. Eric Klein, author of the book The Crystal Stair, defines this concept, known as otherization, to be the action of turning another person or group into an alien other, into a thing. And when we live our lives believing the world is separated into the people who are like us and the people who are like them, we turn off our ability to be tolerant, compassionate, and even empathetic. So let's corner the problem, duke it out with the impacts, and finally shake hands as we find our solutions.
Okay, so that's her video or her speech from 2015. Now think about that topic and then listen to this one here, which was
The
next year.
Quantum Society.
Every single one of you is wrong. And quite frankly, I'm disgusted with you. And it's not just like you're a little bit wrong and I can get over it. Your way of living has been blasphemous. You might not believe me, but there is only one correct way to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that is the way that I do it. You take 2 slices of bread, Sara Lee whole grain white only. Spread peanut butter on the right and jelly on the left. Put them together, slice it diagonally, and then, my friends, you have art. Convert now or you'll be damned to hell! Okay, well, maybe hell is a little extreme for a sandwich, but unfortunately, much like this PB&J, we often only see 2 ways of thinking. My way, or the way that sends you to eternal suffering. According to Dr. Peter Elbow of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, humans instinctively find it easiest to classify large amounts of complex information into 2 groups. Many scholars call this binary thinking, coined after the language of binary coding, in which each and every computing operation is reduced to just 2 digits, 0 and 1. We simplify complex ideas so that we can fit them into the categories that we arbitrarily create. We say ours and theirs, like and dislike, day and night. But in doing this, we gloss over the intricacies of dawn, noon, and twilight, the time right before sunset, not the angsty vampires. Now, this might not sound like such a terrible thing. After all, it's just the way we think. But when we begin to classify real people and real situations into just 2 groups, we face a computing malfunction, as the binary allows us to, at best, ignore their contributions, and at worst, justify unspeakable atrocities. And this troubles me greatly. So today I'll split this discussion into more than 2 sections. First, we'll analyze what the binary is. Next, we'll break down that binary into a few examples, taking multifaceted viewpoints. And finally, we'll program a solution and upgrade this broken society to version 2.0.
Okay, so as you can see, we'll pull this back up here. As you can see, these topics are functionally the same. I mean, you're talking about the idea of otherization as the core to some speech, but both of these performers, these students, were able to kind of put their own personal twist on it and really come at it from a different angle. And in fact, if you kind of watch that J.J. Kapoor speech, the 2017 one, it's again, same kind of basic theme. And so you can see this 3 nationals in a row here, just kind of the same boom, boom, boom type of thing, where you have the same topic essentially presented 3 different ways, but at its core, the same thing. So kind of in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to say here is really, if your students connect with a topic, make sure that they connect with it at a deep level, and they're probably going to be okay. Don't really shy away just because something is possibly overdone. Just make sure that you put your own twist on it, and it'll be probably fine. But sometimes you'll have to get out there and run it a couple times and maybe reboot the speech or come up with a different topic. That's just the reality of the event. And if students are just still completely out of ideas, we all have those squirrely freshman boys who are just no clue, and they have no clue, whatever, I don't know, and they can't come up with a topic. You're like, okay, let's sit down, get on social media, find a story right now that you think is either infuriating or interesting, and then let's sit down and talk about that. There's no shortage of topics that can come through this way. I've yet to run into somebody who hasn't eventually stumbled into a topic with this. Maybe it's not the best topic in the world, but again, as long as they approach it at a personal level, then generally they're going to be pretty okay. We've got our topic picked now, or I guess one more thing to say here. It's kind of tricky as you deal with topics, and it's not necessarily just topics themselves, but it's also examples that I would kind of say this for. Often we have kind of this knee-jerk reaction to, well, your judges aren't going to probably like that topic. I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I think that it's problematic from some aspect. You have kind of the gatekeeping response, but we have to ask our students. I always ask my student, if they say a topic that I think is going to be somewhat controversial or just not really fly with the judges, I'll ask them. I'm like, well, here's the problem. Judges are probably going to not like it too well, but do you personally find this topic important enough that you want to present it? And kind of leave that option for themselves. And one thing that you can do is make sure that you really balance the issue and consider kind of all sides around this issue. And there are so many different ways to look at and perceive things. And I'll give you an example. If you watch the 2016 speech that we did with Hannah at Nationals on the Quantum Society that I showed you the intro there for, part of the binary discussion is, of course, the gender binary and the question of trans rights and things like that. And we're writing the speech, and I'm kind of talking to her about it, and it's like, hey, we probably should include something about this. And she said, I'm not too sure about where to go with this. And of course, the conservative nature, that being at National is a little bit different, even though we are in Salt Lake City. But at the time, 2016 was right when kind of the bathroom discussion was going on. And we joked about that in the speech as well. And so it was still a little bit early on in the discussion of trans rights. And so the way that we decided to approach this was the example that we used was an example of a woman who got beat up who was beaten for being trans, but the catch was she never claimed to be trans. Basically, a guy looked at her, thought she looked like she was trans, and beat her up. And so with that, we kind of felt like it was balancing. We have this nod towards, here's the problem with gender binary, but at the same time, it's an example that I think most sides can kind of agree with. Now, that being said, you've got to be careful and avoid false equivalencies. Certainly the idea that everything has two sides. I mean, I think right now, like, that's even a good oratory topic that you could embrace right now, is this idea that we're seeing discussed in a lot of school boards of, well, we need to make sure everything's balanced, and they're talking more about politics, but then it's kind of morphing into this, well, let's make sure there's two sides of the Holocaust. I mean, there are some things there are no two sides to. So be cautious of that, but do consider kind of multiple sides of the issue here. And so think about those things, think about how we can kind of put this different approach towards the topic together even if it's something, and make sure that you flush out all of the sides of that. Research, of course, research is pretty straightforward. Scholarly, you want to have good scholarly research, but you also need to have good examples. And one of the things is that I always tell students is be prepared to change examples when you get to, as the season goes on. Your speech is never done. And that's another thing that I think is important to approach oratory, is go into oratory with this understanding that your speech is never done. Even the speeches that I've gotten onto the final stage, we made changes before the final stage. It's a work in progress. You're never going to get finished with it. And as long as you have that mentality, I think it's okay. We're always working to get better. What can we do to get better? And I've got a couple pictures here on the bottom. Brene Brown, as an example, there is always interesting. She comes up a lot. She's given a lot of good TED Talks. And again, that's another place that you can have kids kind of mine information from, is all of the TED Talks things, Psychology Today, Google Scholar, all of those places are good examples. And often what you will find is that there's a lot of authors out there that are, it's not really a criticism, but they're kind of vague. And Brene Brown is a good example. In 2015, there were multiple finalists citing her in their speeches, even though their speeches were relatively different. And she just talks about a lot of things, and a lot of kind of the psychological things kind of blend together. The other picture down here, I think, is an interesting example. This is Elliot Rogers. You may or may not remember him. He was a spree killer from 2014. He was the one where he kind of grew up in Hollywood. His dad was, I think, on film crews for some big movies and things. And one night he drove around and shot and killed a number of women. And he talked about, he had this big manifesto where he talked about, very patriarchal, just, women owe me dates and they should respect me and they don't, and I'm just tired of all this. And so it was something that was an absolute tragedy, but is, again, if you go back and watch the 2014 Nationals, there were, I think, at least 4 of the speeches that made it to semis. So basically 4 of the speeches that made it to the top 12, or the top 14, I guess, those speeches specifically cited him as a example that relates to their problem, even though they all had very different problems. The one that kind of sticks out the most to me is the second place speech about gamification. That's a really good speech. And the speech that won certainly is a good speech as well. But it was just interesting to see those examples. And the thing about that is that incident happened just a few weeks before nationals. And I think it really goes to show you how much changing kind of as the season goes on, things happen in society. You've got to be able to respond. You've got to be able to update, adapt, and grow. There was even one year in a final speech where it was one of the years where NSDA had an app and it kind of was a big mess, and somebody like literally called the app out during their speech. And you're like, look, that thing happened that week. So you know that they're making updates there. All right, so we've got a topic, we're doing research, now we're ready to write. So how are we going to write? What are we going to do? The format for an oratory, for the most part, is pretty simple. I'm going to show you kind of the basic structure. There are a handful of other structures out there. The most prominent other structure being kind of a 2-pronged approach to the speech. But this traditional speech structure was successful at nationals last year. 4 of the 6 finalists use this basic speech structure. This is what we use in pretty much all of our speeches. And so we'll go through this speech structure here, and we'll start with the introduction. For the intro, again, pretty basic: hook, brief explanation, and preview. What I tell the students is you've got to have an engaging hook, and it's got to be a story. It needs to be a small story. Anecdote would be, I guess, a proper term to call it, an anecdote that you can relate in some way to something. Then you need to move into a brief explanation of your topic. Introduce the topic, have a clear 2 or 3 sentences about this. You want to say kind of the issue and then what your concern is. Oftentimes in the speeches, if you go back through and look, they don't say it as much anymore, but for a while you would literally be able to identify people's thesis by the phrase, "and this is my concern." Today it's tweaked slightly, but everyone pretty much has some device, kind of rhetorical device here that says that basic thing: this is my concern, or this is why I'm worried, or this is what I'm thinking about, something along those lines that helps identify that thesis. And with this, you need to have a citation in your intro. I always recommend at least one scholarly citation. And going back through, and if you watch the 2021 finalists, all 6 speeches had a citation in their introduction, and they had 2 of the 6 actually had 2 citations in their introduction. That's so kind of something to think about there with that. And I will give you speech times here. We'll talk about timing here in a second. And then of course you can have, and then you give your preview, and then you can use, I don't know if this is the right term, but I call it a rhetorical framing device. A rhetorical framing device, or a rhetorical frame, is what I call when somebody gives an oratory and they're going to have essentially a theme for their speech. And you'll see it pop up in their preview of the speech. And then as they transition to each of their points, they carry that frame through. And I'll show you an example of one real quick here. Let's pull this here. So here's one. This is the national champion from this year.
Our second speaker is code 4193 with the oration, "The Difference Between Lemons and Lemonade."
We'll jump a second here in her
But
speech.
instead, her feelings of anger, pity, and disgust for the man who left her behind. And that's not something we see very often. In fact, we tend to see the opposite. Maybe it happened when someone ran into you on the hallway, or they interrupted you in a conversation. You said sorry, and you didn't have to. According to Dr. Karina Schufman from the University of Philadelphia, women not only report themselves committing more offenses, but apologize more often for doing so. Women are quite literally apologizing for existing. So today, let's use Beyonce's songs to figure out the problem. First, we'll hold up and examine the situation, see how sorry affects us on a daily basis, and finally, find our freedom from this prison of apologies.
So you can see there, she's got that framing device of the Beyonce speeches that she drops right before her preview, or each of her main points. And then in her speech, she's going to return to the Beyonce speeches as kind of that transitional device. Like when she talks about her, right before her solution, she says, we'll get into formation. Reference there to that Beyonce song. And that's what I call a rhetorical framing device. I know some people absolutely, you've got to have one, you got to have one, you got to have one, you got to have one. That's not the case. You can have one, you can not have one. I will tell you this, in last year's final round, she was the only one that had that rhetorical frame, that little device that she carried through in each of her things. And even going back to 2014, it's hit and miss. I'll show you the data on that here in a second. Now we'll move on to the body of the speech. The traditional format for oratory is exposition, take a scholarly approach and explain the problem, come up with examples, and then go to a solution. Typically in the example section, I have 3 examples that I tell the students to give. I tell them that they need to have one of those examples be a personal example. This can present a challenge when it comes to ORAT. And I think as coaches, we need to be mindful that we don't want to push our students to reveal something that they're not ready to reveal. So you need to have a very open conversation with your students about making sure that they're comfortable with what they're saying, making sure that they're sharing a story with a judge that's a stranger and they're fine telling that story. There are situations where students have told me no, and that's fine. And you got to leave it there. It's part of our job as a coach to make sure that our students are comfortable with what they're doing, what they're performing. And in the example section, this is where it comes up. The 3 examples, what I like to do is kind of light example, humorous example, personal example, and then a pretty heavy example. I structure those, obviously the lighter one I always put first, but the personal example, I put either second or third, depending upon which one's going to be more powerful. And overall for this section, your speech, you really need to think about that kind of traditional component of a story, that idea of rising tension. You really need to hit that last example hard. Lots of emotion, lots of strength, lots of power with that. Leave them hanging as you transition into the solution. And think about those examples. Which one's going to work best where? Is it the personal going to go first, or is it going to go second or third? The lighter one probably shouldn't be your personal example, because again, you need to show that personal connection to the speech there. And the examples are just the embodiment of, or the real world practical example of the problem as identified in the exposition. And then when you get to the solution, again, make sure you've got good scholarly example of what you can do to solve. The solution part gets tricky because so many of the things, like we're literally trying to solve societal problems, like, oh, let's solve racism in 10 minutes. And that's a joke that people make at a higher level in oratory is, let's get real, there's not much that we can do. Be creative with your solutions, acknowledge the truth, acknowledge the limitations of the solutions, and definitely make sure that what you're doing is focusing on kind of that personal level. And as I kind of think about this, one thing I forgot to mention a little bit earlier is we occasionally at the local level here see people who want to do policy speeches as a topic, like here's a policy, like let's get rid of the death penalty or something like this. Those types of speeches are not the types of speeches you're traditionally seeing do well at nationals. You've got more of these social issues so that people personally connect to them. If students want to talk about those things, I think that those can be a component of a speech over a broader social issue. So think about that with them and kind of come in up with that. And then the conclusions are often just pretty much almost forgotten completely in these speeches. So I'll go ahead and show this to you. I think that this surprises a lot of people. When you look at oratory I like to go back to 2014, and here's why. Understand that when you get on stage at nationals, they don't really time. It was an awkward moment in 2015 before we went out, and the head person is kind of the head tab person is talking to us, And one of the kids kind of looks around and goes, okay, I'm just going to ask, are we being timed? And the response is, technically, yes, I have a timer, but I don't tell the judges the time unless somebody asks me for it, and nobody ever asks me for it. And so when you watch those final round speeches, when you have your kids sit down and watch the final round speech, understand that that is a speech that's going to go 12, maybe 13 minutes. And if you're going to say, okay, see that, I want you to do that, they're going to be racking their brain. Like, how can I do that? How can I go this slow? So how can I match the pacing and hit all those notes and include all that information in 10 minutes? Well, here's the secret. You can't. And that's why I think that the 2014 videos, the 2014 national videos, and the 2021 videos are super important. If you go to the NSDA website, you can watch all of the semifinals for 2014. And those semifinal speeches run just like a regular round runs. But at NSDA Nationals, understand there is a 30-second grace period, and you better believe competitive speeches take advantage of that 30-second grace period. Of the 14 speeches that made it to semifinals in 2014, here's the average length for each of those different sections. Intro, 2:15, expos, 2:30, examples, 3 minutes, solution, 1:55, conclusion is only 31 seconds. The average speech time is 10 minutes and 11 seconds. You can see here's the individual breakdown with only a handful of speeches kind of being under 10 minutes there. And again, this is back in 2014. But if you look at this, this is the breakdown and the difference between semifinals and finals. The national champion, America minus the Dream, you can see went from 10:18 to 13:22, 10:28 to 13:16. And you are taking massive, massive leaps here with these speeches. And again, tell your students that, front load that, be like, look, I want you to watch this, but realize this is kind of what it looks like, but they have a little bit of extra time. So just be aware of that. 2016, again, you've got, so 2015, 2016, you can see the length of these speeches here, and in terms of what they were. Lengthwise, definitely were way long. But here's the new data. This is 2021. So this is the 2021 breakdown of the finalists. They don't have the semifinalists, but if you look, the 2021 speakers, all of them hit that 10-minute mark plus the grace period. I personally wouldn't put too much credence in 2020. That, again, those were all recorded, so it was all just, if you flubbed, redo it, you know, get your best one. I mean, we all know that business. These at least were live. I think that there's some definite value with that. Now, if you look at the speeches, you can see these 4 speeches here all use the basic format that I'm introducing tonight. You can see the time variation was a little bit larger for some of these individuals. Again, conclusions, tell your students the conclusions are almost forgotten. This student, they basically didn't even have a conclusion. These 2 speeches were structured slightly differently. This girl here, she basically blended her exposition and examples. This girl took it another step and actually had an independent, so there were basically 3 problems. Each problem had an independent example and an independent solution as part of their main point. So the structure on that was a little bit different, kind of interesting. You can go check that one out if you want. But again, here are the breakdowns for the 2021 Nationals. So 7 years later, after I did this original analysis, and it's all about the same. So not much change here. A little bit of shorter intros, a little bit shorter exposition, a slight increase on the examples, and then solutions about the same, conclusions about the same, and overall 2 seconds longer on your average speech length. Not too much change from that. A couple things here. I know we're getting a little bit past 8 here, but I'll get through just a few things. I always tell students, write too much. Write longer than you think you're going to be. I tell students to start by trying to hit about 1,700 to 1,800 words, and then we'll shorten it from there. Trimming things down really does force you to make your word choice as best as it can be and cram as much information as you can in. And that efficiency really drives good speeches. I'm also asked a lot, well, how many sources should I have? That's really, really difficult to say. What I will tell you is have a scholarly source in your introduction, have a scholarly source in your solution, have a couple sources there in the middle, and then the rest is just up to you, however many you want to put in. I've seen some where it's closer to an extemp speech. You're just source, source, source. I've seen others without a lot, and it really doesn't affect how well they do. Make sure that you have some entertaining things in there, but you definitely be careful, with the tone, because you want to ratchet it up. I mean, if you're going to talk about people dying, you've got to have that right tonal shift in your speech there. With the nationals audience, when I have students get to nationals, I always try and have them throw in a speech and debate joke. English teacher jokes are always really good too. If you look at my 2 finalists in 2015, we joke about, one thing is we joke specifically about the Herman Melville, because one of our English teachers in our building is really obsessed with Moby Dick. We also joke about duo contestants matching. In Hannah's speech in 2016, she jokes about Foucault because she cites Foucault as a source, and we drop in this joke about debate, calm down debaters, orators can cite him too. People always get a big kick out of that because, let's admit it, we're kind of all, debate and speech nerds, so why not joke about it? Again, just, kind of performance here, make sure everything is scripted. Recordings, record your students and have them watch it themselves, like your own worst critic. Have them sit down and watch it, see what they say. As we said, make sure that you go through and think about how you can update, keep things fresh. Try and vary up who you have your students perform in front of, and always tell them slow down. That's always a big thing. People always rush. A couple things about nationals here, just real quick. Again, change up your speech. Don't forget your 30-second grace period. Make sure your examples are updated. Practice, practice, practice. And also remember, for nationals, you can submit a new version of your speech on the day of registration. And one thing I will also mention here, if you ever get in a position where you think you have a student who's going to make a deep run, and we're always dreaming, but we know when we've got like, okay, this kid's got it. You have to submit the scripts, the performance scripts, to the national office there, the ombudsman's office. You can provide provisional lines or things that you will add on the chance that you will make it to the final round. That's something that I was standing in line with people when we were turning them in, and people were mentioning, look, because they've tightened up those rules in the past couple years. They weren't as tight previously. But now that you have to turn in that script, I was talking to coaches about that as we were turning the scripts in, and they said, yeah, we put provisional lines that we say we will perform if we make it to the final stage. Here's what we'll do. So just kind of be aware of that. And then of course at nationals, pace yourself, because it's a long slog. And that's pretty much it. If you want to email me, that's my email, and I'll be more than happy to send you or to answer questions or send you any information there. But I guess we can go ahead and have a minute here to take questions if anybody has any. You can type it in the chat or unmute yourself.
How often do you have students pick something like as a topic that's kind of an inappropriate thing, and as a coach, you have to have some discretion and say, we're going to ixnay on that and not take it out? Or do you say, if you want to pursue this, you can take it? You know, what's the editorial role of a coach here?
Right. So to answer the first question, how often? Every day. I mean, every day. I mean, let's be honest, kids, that's always the first thing they come up with, is they come up with terrible ideas. No, I think that the real answer is it depends on what makes it inappropriate. Is it just straight up offensive, or is it inappropriate in the context of not a lot of judges are going to like this, but we can still do it? And if it's something that's super inappropriate, I would definitely pull back. I mean, we've got to gatekeep at some level, but talk to the students and see what can we do. Like, I like your idea. Always tell them, look, okay, I like your idea and I like your passion, but what's a different angle we can take with this? How can we address this? Because I'm going to tell you right now, grandma in the back of the room is going to be pretty upset when you say this stuff. But grandma needs to hear things like this. So what's the best way that we can balance this out, and see if you can kind of collaborate with them on an approach. And oftentimes those topics will kind of morph into examples for a softer topic or something that's a little bit broader that would be more open to a wider audience. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. Good question. Anybody else? Okay, I think that's about it. Again, if anybody wants to email me and ask me any more questions, feel free to. I'm more than happy to help.
I just want to say thank you, James, for helping us out here. I may have missed a little bit of it, but when I got back, I was carefully crafting notes while I was text messaging and other things, trying to keep up with you and all the tricks of the trade that you haven't shared with me yet. But I really appreciate the wisdom you have. Thank you to all of you who have shown up for this session. I'm gonna hit the stop record. Boop. Goodbye, recording. Are you sure you want to stop the recording?